Okay, sorry folks, I'm back. So I'm going to pick it up just a little bit and try to stay off my little tangents as best I can. All right, so the Umayyad Caliphate falls in the 700s, about 751, in large part to the Abbasid clan. And the Abbasid Caliphate was a caliphate that was, they weren't, they were just more inclusive to non-Arab Muslims, and they were more inclusive to the Shia Muslims' desires to kind of change the path, that Sunni Shia split, the issues that were caused there. They were more responsive to the Shia Muslims' demands, even though they're eventually going to ignore them as well. But they will, they take control of the Umayyad, the Caliphate, and this begins the golden age of the Islamic world, from the 750s into to the 1200s, so until the Mongols show up. Actually, their major achievement was the trade network. And this is where you started to see Islam spread a lot more by merchants, because you controlled for a good portion of this time period the Abbasid Caliphate from their capital of Baghdad, which they built. They controlled an area from North Africa to India. So you paid taxes to the same people. I mean, everything was very standardized. It made a lot of sense, and it made it safer. You started to see the beginnings of commercial banking, the ideas of flying credit, like we talked about with the Song Dynasty. You could draw on a depository house in Baghdad, go to Damascus, and the same family owns another deposit house there. So you could take a piece of paper, withdraw your funds, and get your money that way, so you weren't having to carry it with you. Other achievements of the Abbasid Caliphate, which again I think you're starting to see some of if you're, as we do the Cave of Wonders activity. It was their architecture. It was the use of arches and domes. Again, and that one of the things that's very unique about Islamic art is because you don't see a lot of paintings of individuals, especially not in mosques, because they don't want them to be represented as idols. So you see lots of geometric patterns and designs, and I think that's one of the real, this is one of the real kind of identifying points of Islamic architecture. They built hospitals because, again, they were obsessed in some ways with advancing medical knowledge, thanks to the translation of Egyptian documents that talked about the embalming process and mummification. You start to see some of the first, real medical journals published under the Islamic world. Ideas like polo, games like polo, Greek, Roman, and other ancient works were preserved in the House of Wisdom. They were transcribing everything to Arabic. Learners from around the world would come to the House of Wisdom in Baghdad to discuss, and you had a true kind of cultural achievement going on there with the House of Wisdom. Beginnings of algebra. Again, if you want another reason to be frustrated about the world, you had a Middle Eastern scholar that gave us what we know of today as algebra. The city of Baghdad was a city built for trade. It was a little bit closer to the Red Sea and Persian Gulf, so they moved it from Damascus, which had been the kind of the home of the Umayyad clan. So this city, again, they built this city kind of in between the Tigris and Euphrates River. You have a mosque that kind of is in the center of it, and then surrounding it is the city itself. The mosque, which is the center of life, is the center of the city as well. And within this, you will have the building of the House of Wisdom. And again, you see the architecture here, use of the domes and the arches. Here is a medical drawing. That's one of the achievements of the Abbasid Caliphate. And then just another kind of image of the ancient city of Baghdad as it was first kind of designed. Now, let me go back. So everything is fine in the Abbasid Caliphate until you start to see in the 1200s the rise of the Mongols. And in the late 1200s, the Mongols show up under Baku, one of the members of Genghis Khan's family. He was one of the grandsons. And this is a pretty old civilization. Baghdad is a pretty solid city surrounded by walls. You have an Islamic army, even though by the 1200s it's fallen into some kind of disarray. It's more Turkic now than it is Arab. They still felt pretty sure they could withstand the attack from a pastoral group like the Mongols. They were wrong. They refused to pay tribute to the Mongols, and so the city was destroyed. Not destroyed as in they just knocked down some walls, They sacked the city. They killed between 200,000 and 300,000 people. They burnt the House of Wisdom to the ground. They destroyed the books. They destroyed works. They destroyed, they destroyed published works. And the last Abbasid emperor or caliph was taken out into the courtyard. He was he was rolled up in a Persian rug, and they killed him by running their horses over him because it was a crime, according to the Mongols, to spill royal blood. So the Persian rug kept that from happening. But they do destroy the city. And here's just a quote kind of from that time period. The Mongols looted and then destroyed mosques, palaces, libraries, and hospitals. Priceless books from Baghdad's 36 public libraries were torn apart. The looters using their leather covers as sandals. Grand buildings that had been the work of generations were burned to the ground. The House of Wisdom, containing countless precious historical documents and books on subjects ranging from medicine to astronomy, was destroyed. Survivors said the waters of the Tigris ran black with ink from the enormous quantities of books flung into the river and red from the blood of the scientists and philosophers killed. Again, just take this quote and kind of in your mind, what does this tell you about the Mongols? There's a lot more to come on them later. All right, culture and society of the Dar al-Islam. Merchants were viewed in better light than they were in Europe. Muhammad had been a merchant, even more so in Asia. They were the bringers of news. They were the bringers of goods. So they were seen, they were well thought of. Women in the Islamic world. Initially, when you think of women in the Islamic world, we tend to think burqas. We tend to think probably not very good for them. But initially, things were pretty good for women in the Islamic world. Through most of the Abbasid Caliphate, they had more rights under Islam than anywhere else. The Islamic world forbid female infanticide, so not killing your child because you were having a daughter. Would allow widows to remarry. They would get cash in a settlement if they were divorced. They could keep a dowry. They were allowed to study and read, not just men. You have a female Sufi writer or a poet the image right there. If they testified in court, they were protected from retaliation. So again, show me somewhere else in the world at this point, even through the 1400s, the 1500s, where women had this kind of respect and this kind of role. Here's where things kind of get tricky. Everything that Muhammad wrote about women was about protecting women, and that's where we're going to start to see changes down the road. Because when Muslims the Muslim armies, the Abbasid Caliphate, comes in contact with places like the Byzantine Empire or in certain locations in India where women are veiled and they're put in harems or they're kept out of sight, they start to use that as a really good sign of how better can we, what better way to protect women than by keeping them away from men, by keeping them veiled so that men can't lust after them. So a lot of the things that we think about in terms of the Islamic world and women today came from other cultures that will be adopted eventually by the Islamic world. Slavery was allowed. Most were imported from Russia, at least initially, Africa and Central Asia to follow. You could not enslave a fellow Muslim. Many slaves chose to convert to Islam in order to gain their freedom. So this happened so often that eventually they said, okay, if you want to convert to Islam, fine, but you're still going to remain a slave because we want to make sure that you're not just converting in order to become, a free man. Many of your slaves taken out of Africa or Central Asia became scholars. They could become politicians. They could be teachers, household helpers. A lot of times they became soldiers if they had the aptitude for it. You didn't see Muslims taking slaves for farm work, for agricultural work. That was really more, down the road when we think about it in terms of European slavery. All right, the Delhi Sultanate, Islam spreads to India around the year 1000. Turkish invaders under a man named Muhammad of Ghazni brought a raiding group of Islamic Turks into northern India. They started raiding and they found themselves in control of northern India relatively quickly by about 1206. They had a violent beginning with Hindu and Buddhist temples and members. When they conquered parts of northern India, they would burn mosques or temples to the ground and replace them with mosques. One of the areas, again, think of modern day Pakistan, which is where you predominantly, which was at one point part of northern India, where your Muslim population is. No matter how big Islam gets in northern India, it's never going to supplant the Hindu families and the Hindu growth there. But it is going to become a cemented presence thanks to the Delhi Sultanate. So how did Islam spread to India? Again, here is where you had a lot of the Sufis, these holy mystics, Muslim missionaries that spoke to the lower caste of Hindu society. They were attractive since it provided an escape from Islam was attractive to the lower caste because it got rid of the caste, just like Buddhism did initially. Endless reincarnation and the wheel of suffering, or read and recite a bit of the Quran and go to heaven. It's a pretty easy choice. Some converted to avoid the jizya, a tax to practice your faith, but a lot of them they're going to convert because it gets them out of that circle of life, death, and rebirth. I'm going to skip this for now. We'll come back to it. West Africa and Islam. This is going to be another part of the world that Islam will spread. This also, again, via merchants, some military growth, but mostly from merchants, spread through urban centers, provided links to Muslim trading partners, provided literate officials and religious legitimacy to the state, and people converted voluntarily and usually were near urban centers where trade happened. Trade is the biggest reason that Islam spread to West Africa, especially into sub-Saharan West Africa. Places like the city of Timbuktu, areas that became predominantly Muslim, because of merchant growth. If we convert to Islam and we build mosques, merchants will keep coming across the desert and bringing us nice things. They were very open with Muslim merchants, and so over time you see a lot of people will convert as well. You also, because of the language, the writing Arabic, they were seen as legitimate. As this was seen as a legitimate way of providing officials some legitimacy. You have an official god that if the mosques back your king, then things are good. Okay, so this is a trade map of West Africa, a trade route of West Africa. This actually has a really cool story to it, and it's the tale of Mansa Musa, the wealthiest man in the world, in charge of the Mali Empire, which was the wealthiest empire probably ever in the world, which we'll talk about here in class later. Unlike India, where Islam tended to stick to the lower caste, people of all levels of society adopted Islam here. A lot of it was because their faith, thanks to the Sufis, they were able to kind of combine some of their old cultural beliefs along with Islam. So you saw Islam practice, but never at the rigidness, at least not at this point, that you saw it in other parts of the world. Again, the further away from Mecca you go, the less likely you are to see super strict enforcement of things like those gender boundaries. In the African world, men and women were always together on the streets, chatting. Women not wearing a whole lot of clothes was not something that was uncommon. You would never have seen Muslim women acting that way closer to Mecca. Islam does attempt to go to Europe. It goes into parts of Spain. It will become the Cordoba Caliphate. There's a fun little story to that. If I get to it in class, I will. But it does try to get into, southern Europe as well. It goes all the way into parts of southern France, and in 732, Islam is defeated by Charles Martel the Hammer. And this is him with his mighty warhammer. And if not for this French king, Islam could have spread into Western Europe, and who knows what the world would look like if that had happened. So again, this is another example of it spreading via military, but once it stopped, it will settle in Spain. And a really unique situation is going to occur in the Cordoba Caliphate there in Spain, where you're going to see Muslims, Jews, and Christians living side by side for a really long time. And the Library of Cordoba, there was mosques in Cordoba, but the Library of Cordoba was much like the House of Wisdom, where you had Muslim and Christian scholars kind of trading info back and forth and things like that. It didn't go over well. It didn't overwhelm Christianity in Spain. There was a high degree of interaction between Muslims and Christians, and then trade expanded and made Spain very wealthy. And then just some of the pictures from the Library of Cordoba, one of the mosques in Cordoba. All right, there you go. I got about 30 seconds left. Again, there's most of this, the other stuff that you're going to need obviously is going to come from the reading. So make sure that you've done the reading. We will quiz probably Tuesday of next week. We'll see how things go. And we got a test coming up. So, all right. If you watch this and have questions, bring them to class. I will answer them. And I'll probably do some more of these kind of flipped lessons. It ends up being about 25 minutes, which is what I told you it would be. I'm skipping some fun stuff.